And I can tell you that there are 2,553 companies in total that can deliver apprenticeships. 1,914 of them are main providers. 380 of those are supporting, so they can support apprenticeships through subcontracting, but they can't deliver as a main provider. And there are 259 employer providers, so employers that can actually provide apprenticeships themselves. So it's really important that before you hire an apprentice, you go on that site and make sure that the company you're about to contract with are able to actually supply you with apprentices. Endpoint assessment. So under the old framework system, I'll quicken up because I know that I'm going over. Under the old framework system, you used to get your knowledge qualification, you get a vocational qualification, that was it, apprenticeship done, and you were signed off. Under the new standards, you have to go through something called endpoint assessment. And what this does with the standards, it's very much, it's competence-based. So somebody comes into the organisation, spends a day or 2 days with the apprentice, shadowing them, watching them. Sometimes they'll ask them to do a competence-based assessment, they'll interview them, and sometimes there might be even a test involved. If the apprenticeship passes that, then they've passed their apprenticeship and they get a certificate. If not, they are able to resit. It's not linked to the knowledge qualification, so you can gain your degree, your HNC, your HND, your A-level, or your BTEC, your City and Guilds, whatever they may be. However, you must still undergo an endpoint assessment to get your apprenticeship certificate. EPAO is just endpoint assessment organisation. They're the people that come into the organisation and carry out that endpoint assessment. And last but not least, cohorts. Now, just a quick word on cohorts. I work with a group of other employers in the region to work together to provide apprenticeships. We can't take enough apprenticeships in science, for example. Tyler is a lab scientist. We only have 4 lab scientists on site. If I go to a college or a university and ask them to run that course, they'll say, yeah, we need at least 8 or 10 to make it worth our while. So what we do is we work with other employers in the region and cohort together and work in collaboration to ensure that we have enough numbers to work together. And what I would do is I would encourage you in your different sectors to do that. It's important that we put differences aside when it comes to apprenticeships and apprentices. It's really important, and I'm going to get on my soapbox in a moment, but it's really important that we keep and retain skills in this region. What we don't want to do is lose some of the skills to move down south. We want to try and keep the skills in this region. And I believe that working as a cohort and putting differences aside with competitors when it comes to young people will benefit us all. If somebody leaves our organisation, they'll go up to one of the other pharmaceutical manufacturers in this region. That's great. And that's fantastic because they might see something in them and promote them into an area that we can't at the moment. And we'll do the same. But what I would like to know is that the person that we're taking has the key skills, knowledges and behaviours that we want as an organisation. So working together when it comes to apprentices is key. I've more or less talked a bit about what I've learned there, but yeah, it's important as well to get buy-in from your work colleagues. Make sure your work colleagues understand the importance of apprenticeships and what they can bring to your organisation. Clicker's not happening. So employers, again, I've talked about finding the commonality. And then finally, work with the providers as well. Look for the best providers to provide you with apprenticeships. It's not about one shop fits all. Shop around, speak to different employers. It's about quality, not quantity. At the end of the day, making sure that you've got somebody who's competent, that you feel comfortable within your workplace. My apologies that I've gone over, but hopefully that's covered all of the points. We'll have a section for Q&A at the end. Matt, do you want this?
Yeah.
I'll pass you over to Matt Clay from Lookers. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. So good morning, guys. Good to see so many of you here today. I'm conscious that I've only got sort of 10 minutes to talk to you about, and I've got quite a bit of detail, so this may feel a little bit whistle-stop. But when we get into the Q&As a little bit later, if there's anything that you want to kind of follow up on, I'm happy to talk to you a little bit about that. So business benefits is quite an interesting topic, particularly in the context of the apprenticeship levy. 2 years ago, when apprenticeships were funded fully through the government, there wasn't really a massive interest from the business on kind of quality and cost because of the way that the funding worked. The apprentice provider would get the money directly from the government through their own contract, and then they'd come to the employer, us, and offer to pay for the apprenticeship training, and we would simply pay for the apprentice. 2 years ago, that model changed, and now obviously under the apprenticeship levy, we have to contract directly with a training provider, and therefore we pay them directly. And as a result of that, accountants suddenly became really interested in what was going on in the world of apprenticeships. So suddenly we had to try and evidence that actually there's a real benefit to what we're doing with apprenticeships, because you're in that interesting world where suddenly there's a real expense going out under the apprenticeship levy, and it can be a little bit unclear as to what we're getting back from that expense. So we went through an exercise to look at the return on our investment for the apprenticeship levy. But I guess before we understand kind of what the return is, we wanted to understand what we're trying to fix at the front end, to establish what our why would be. So, yeah, a couple of clicks on this. So for us, we work in the motor retail industry, and a mainstay of our apprenticeship program is all around technicians, and we're going to hear from Brad, one of our previous cohorts, a little bit later. But actually, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to address with apprenticeships is around growing our own skilled workforce moving forward. Like many technical industries, there's a real skill shortage out there, and to go and recruit and go and bring in technical people, often we have to pay a lot more than maybe we'd want to. So actually, apprenticeship levy gave us a real opportunity to change the way that we do things. So we wanted to describe at the front end what was the financial impact of the problem as it stands today. And what we saw was that recruitment costs and subsequent loss of productivity by not having skilled technical labour in the workforce resulted in a net value that cost the business, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but there's a couple of £1 million listed on there. So that was kind of bottom line, the impact of not having the right number of people within the business at any one time. So that's where the apprenticeship levy comes in for us, to start to address some of that issue. And this is where we wanted to start to look at how the return of those apprentices are actually benefiting the net outlay that we spend on their training. Because I think there is a perception that when you bring young people and apprentices into the business, and the nature of what they're doing, they're on a learning journey, that actually that can look like a cost to the business. So we wanted to address that. And actually, when you start to dive into the detail, that initial cost and that sort of ethos that maybe managers might have in pockets, and we're certainly not unique to that. There definitely was a perception that apprentices were a cost to the business. When you look at the return that they bring into the business, actually it's a massive outlay. So we simply looked at the training costs over the 3-year period for kind of our major program, and they came to a total of £9,000. But we wanted to look at each of those years and start to digest what value is the apprentice adding to the business. So from a year 1, year 2, and year 3 apprentice, how are they contributing to the bottom line for us? And to do that, we worked with one of our manufacturer partners, and we simply paired an apprentice with a technician qualified who's working in the dealership to understand the impact of a technician without an apprentice versus a technician with an apprentice. And for example, technician A, no apprentice, might have been 100% productive, say. Technician B, who was working alongside an apprentice in year 1, may have still been 100% productive. Whereas as they grew and they learned and they developed, in year 2, they may have added an extra 20% to that technician. And then in year 3, they add a further 50%. So these were some numbers that we started to see. So actually the net impact of having an apprentice with a qualified person in the business wasn't that it was an additional cost. Actually, it was quite the opposite, because they were effectively a free pair of hands. And towards the end of the program, we started to see that they were 50% as productive as a qualified person. You've got to remember, this is a young apprentice still on a learning journey. They're not at the qualified rate of pay at this moment. And the knowledge that they're gaining is really contemporary. So what we started to see as well was this model where apprentices in pockets started to train some of our qualified technicians on some of the new technologies that were coming into the industry. So effectively, the net profit of an apprentice versus the cost, we saw that the training costs in this example were £9,000. But actually over a 3-year period, in terms of how they generated income for the business, they brought in £90,000. So we saw that actually it was an £81,000 uplift versus not doing the apprenticeship program. And that was really powerful for us. As soon as we reached that number, that we thought, actually, this is a really good story to tell back to the decision makers in the business who are all looking at that bottom line. I think quite often when we talk about apprenticeships and L&D within the organisation, it feels like it's the right thing to do. And that message is certainly out there, and it's kind of what we've been battering away prior to the apprenticeship levy. But actually, as soon as that comes in and you get the accountants looking at it and there's a real hard figure at the bottom, if we can produce some MI to demonstrate the real impact of that, suddenly everyone becomes really interested and engaged in how can we start to get more of those guys into the business. So when we put that on a graph and started to look at how apprentice revenue starts to fix the problem, we then found that there was a real drive for us across the business to increase the amount of apprentices that we recruited, utilising this levy budget that Chris talked about. So each year you get your levy budget, and that is whatever it might be for your organisation. And we're actually in a situation now where we're trying to get to the point where we get to co-investment, because we recognise that as soon as we've drained our apprenticeship levy budget, we're then into this model of co-investment, where any further training will only cost us 10% of the price of the programme. So actually it becomes even more beneficial for us to do that, to start to address the problems at the front end, which was all around these expensive recruitment costs and lost productivity of skilled labour in the organisation. So for us, it was really powerful to try and understand the commercial impact of that. And as a result of it, we went from recruiting 60 apprentices a year across the business to 150, because the business recognised that actually what we're trying to do here is achieve a future need for the business, bring down recruitment costs, and actually we see that apprentices do have a commercial benefit to the business. So that was just kind of a way that within our business, we're starting to look at how the business benefits from apprentices commercially, and starts to engage and talk in the business's language. I think the second thing that I'm going to talk about is around how to select a training provider. I'm sure if you guys are up and running with apprenticeship programs, you'll have a very similar process, but I just wanted to talk about a few key steps that I thought was worth putting down. So the first things first, before you can choose any training provider, it's all around understanding what program you want to be able to deliver to the apprentices. And to do that, Chris mentioned it earlier, you've got the Institute for Apprentices website, which lists all the relevant programs. If you just do a quick Google on the type of apprenticeship program you want to deliver, you'll very quickly come across the website. It's really neatly laid out and it details the relevant programs. From here, once you've selected it, on the right-hand side of the web page, you'll find that you can actually search for training providers that deliver that standard. And once you go into that, you'll find that you can narrow that down based on the postcode that you want to search for. And once you've established who they are, you'll see a long list of training providers that will provide that standard. And this is where it starts to get quite neat and interesting, because you can now start to look at the delivery model that you want to deliver for your apprentice training program. So for us, a national company, we were looking at something that was able to be delivered at your workplace, opposed to maybe block release training or 1 day a week, whatever that might look like. So you can start to filter based on how you want your delivery to look like. And then again, it will bring out those relevant training providers for you. Once you've found the provider that kind of fits your need, we found that it was really important to start to look at the provider's Ofsted rating. And historically, the Ofsted reviews would be done once every 4 to 6 years. But following the introduction of the levy, we're starting to see a lot more frequent Ofsted reports coming in on the back of the introduction. And actually, it's quite a vital step for us, because we got to the point where we found a training provider, we met with them, we were ready to go live, and then we had a quick look at their Ofsted rating, and they'd actually just received the recent monitoring visit, and were straight away told that they weren't allowed to take on any more apprentices as a result of that Ofsted. So it's quite interesting for us to have done that just before we pushed the button to go live. So I would definitely say that would be a massive learning for new providers that we induct into the business. Once you're happy with the Ofsted, it's then worth establishing contact, meeting with the provider, talking to them about the delivery model, maybe getting a couple of apprentices to come and meet with the provider as well, make sure they're happy about how it's going to work. And then finally, ask the provider for some references. They may well be passing you some really strong companies that they work with, but it's a final sort of sense check just to make sure that this provider that you are inevitably going to be working with on a longer term sort of ambition are going to be suitable for the business, and you've got a reference from it. So just a final couple of top tips in terms of looking for your provider. I think it's really important at the front end to establish a bit of a strategy for your provision. Like I say, we're a national company, so we have kind of a split view. We have a set of specialist training providers for our technical programs, and they specialise purely in the technical training. And then maybe for our more sort of soft skills and generic programs, such as business admin and customer service, we've looked for more of a global provider, someone that can do multiple programs for us, but we only end up having one contract with them. And I guess the beauty of that means that you then only have one set of solicitor fees to be able to go back and forward with the contracts, because all these little tiny quirks can start to add up. And, you know, when at the front end, when we were setting up the program, we had quite a few providers. I was quite a few times we had to go back to the lawyer with multiple contracts, get them reviewed, get them planned, etc. Whereas if you can have one structured contract and a provider that can do multiple programs, obviously that does cut down on costs a little bit. It's definitely worth researching multiple providers. You know, they may all have a very similar delivery model, but actually how they go about it tangibly, what that looks like, will differ. So I would definitely recommend meeting with a few and kind of seeing what they look like. And then national and local providers both have pros and cons. You know, some of these national providers, big organizations, have got a lot of resource that they can rely on, and they have quite innovative programs. I would say if you go on to something like FE News or something like that, and you look at some of the Ofsted reviews and kind of look at the size of some of the companies that have maybe come under fire, you might find a bit of a correlation. However, local providers on a smaller scale maybe don't have the same resource, but because you're a massive customer for them, and maybe more flexible around what they can offer you as well. So I wouldn't kind of weigh on one or the other when you're considering a provider. Definitely meet with a few. And that's it from me.